Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Hugo Duke stood in his mahogany-paneled study, the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler catching the firelight. At 42, he commanded respect wherever he went, 6 feet of calculated precision wrapped in an Armani suit. His steel-gray eyes had seen too much, learned too much about human nature during his years building his private security empire from nothing. Trust was a luxury he'd never afforded himself, except when it came to his family. The grandfather clock chimed 8 as Marissa's laughter drifted from the kitchen. 20 years of marriage to the woman who'd stolen his heart in college, when she was a radiant journalism major with dreams of changing the world. Now she managed their daughter's equestrian career while Hugo's company, Duke Securities, protected Fortune 500 executives and their secrets. "Daddy." 8-year-old Samantha burst into the study, her dark curls bouncing as she launched herself into his arms. She was his anchor, the one pure thing in a world that had taught him to question everything except her innocent love. "How was school, princess?" Hugo asked, setting down his drink to focus entirely on her. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best reader in 2nd grade. Samantha beamed. Then her expression grew serious. "Daddy, why do you have those cameras everywhere? Mommy says you don't trust people." Hugo's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Even his home security system was state-of-the-art, covering every angle except the blind spots he'd deliberately created in his own bedroom and study. Old habits from a childhood spent surviving his father's volatile business dealings. Deals that had ultimately gotten the man killed when Hugo was 16. "Sometimes, sweetheart, we have to protect what matters most," he said, tucking a curl behind her ear. "That's why Daddy works so hard." Marissa appeared in the doorway, still beautiful at 39, though something had changed in her emerald eyes over the past months. A distance that hadn't been there before, a guilt that flickered when she thought he wasn't looking. "Dinner's ready," she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Your favorite, filet mignon." As they gathered around the dining table, Hugo observed his family with the same analytical precision he used to vet security threats. Samantha chattered about her upcoming school play, but Marissa seemed preoccupied, checking her phone repeatedly. "Everything all right?" Hugo asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make her look up. "Of course. Just coordinating tomorrow's lesson schedule," Marissa replied quickly, sliding the phone into her pocket. Hugo nodded, filing away the micro-expression of panic that had flashed across her face. He'd built his fortune on reading people, and his wife was lying. The question was why. Later that night, as Marissa claimed exhaustion and turned away from him in their king-sized bed, Hugo stared at the ceiling. His instincts, honed by years of betrayal and survival, whispered warnings he didn't want to hear. But Hugo Duke hadn't survived this long by ignoring his instincts. He'd learned long ago that everyone had a price, everyone had secrets, and everyone eventually revealed their true nature, even those you loved most. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 2 weeks later, Hugo sat in his downtown office, 20 floors above the city that had shaped him into who he was. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as he reviewed security footage from a client's corporate event. His assistant, Catalina Peck, knocked and entered with his coffee, black, no sugar, just like everything else in his life. "Your 2 p.m. canceled," she informed him, her efficient manner one of the reasons he'd hired her 5 years ago. "And Mrs. Duke called. She'll be late picking up Samantha from school. Some emergency at the stable." Hugo's fingers paused over his keyboard. The 3rd emergency this month. He pulled up his phone and scrolled through Marissa's recent texts, noting the increasing frequency of last-minute changes and vague explanations. "Catalina, I need you to run a background check," he said quietly. "On who?" "Drew Munoz. He's the new trainer at Willowbrook Stables." Hugo had done his research. Munoz was 34, recently divorced, with a reputation for being too friendly with his clients. More importantly, he'd started working at Samantha's riding stable 2 months ago, right when Marissa's behavior had begun to change. "How deep do you want me to go?" "All the way down." That evening, Hugo arrived home to find Marissa in the shower and Samantha in her room, drawing pictures of horses. He kissed his daughter goodnight, then retreated to his study where Catalina's preliminary report waited in his encrypted email. Drew Munoz had a pattern. Divorced twice, both times cited for infidelity. Financial troubles despite coming from money. His family owned a chain of feed stores across 3 states. Most interesting was a restraining order filed by his first wife, claiming emotional manipulation and threats. Hugo's phone buzzed with a text from Marissa, working late with Drew on Samantha's jumping technique. Don't wait up. At 11:47 p.m., his home security system registered Marissa's car in the driveway. She crept upstairs, shoes in hand, thinking he was asleep. Hugo lay still, listening to her careful footsteps, the soft rustle of clothing being discarded, the faint sound of her washing her hands longer than necessary. When she finally slipped into bed, Hugo could smell the faint trace of cologne that wasn't his. The next morning, he watched her over his coffee cup as she prepared Samantha's lunch with nervous energy. His wife of 20 years, the mother of his child, was having an affair. The knowledge settled in his chest like a block of ice, cold and unforgiving. But Hugo Duke didn't act on emotion. He planned. He calculated. And he never, ever forgave a betrayal. "I've been thinking," he said casually, causing Marissa to glance up from Samantha's sandwich. "Maybe I should take more interest in Samantha's riding. Meet this trainer everyone's talking about." The color drained from Marissa's face. That's not necessary. You're so busy with work." "I'm never too busy for family," Hugo replied, his gray eyes holding hers until she looked away. As Marissa hurried Samantha out the door, Hugo made a mental note. She was getting careless, which meant the affair was progressing. Soon, she'd make a mistake that would give him everything he needed. In his study, he opened a new file on his computer. Not for a client this time, but for something far more personal. The game had begun, and Hugo Duke always played to win. Chapter 3. The Message. 3 days later, Hugo was helping Samantha with her homework at the kitchen table when she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. His trained eye immediately caught the tension in her small shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she held the note. "A man gave this to me at the park," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he knows Mommy very well." Her dark eyes, so much like his own, were filled with confusion and fear. "He told me to give it to you when she wasn't around." Hugo's blood turned to ice, but his expression remained calm as he took the paper. Years of controlling his reactions under pressure served him now, when his daughter needed him most. As he unfolded the note, he read the words that confirmed his worst suspicions. "Your wife is a whore. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at midnight if you want proof. Come alone, or your daughter learns the truth about Mommy's new hobby." A friend. The handwriting was masculine, aggressive. Someone was playing games, but they'd made a critical error. They'd involved his daughter. Hugo's grip on the paper tightened as a cold fury settled in his chest, the kind that had once driven him to break a man's arm for threatening his business partner. "Daddy." Samantha's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you mad at me?" "Never," he said firmly, pulling her close. "You did exactly the right thing by bringing this to me." His mind was already calculating, planning. "Pack a bag, princess. We're going to take a little trip to Grandma River's house." Marissa's mother lived 2 hours away in a secure retirement community, far enough to keep Samantha safe while he dealt with this threat. As his daughter ran upstairs to pack, Hugo's phone buzzed with a text from Marissa. "Late again tonight. Drew wants to discuss Samantha's competition schedule." The irony wasn't lost on him. While his wife was betraying their marriage, someone was using their daughter as a pawn. Both sins were unforgivable in Hugo's world, and he'd learned long ago that forgiveness was a weakness that got people killed. He called his mother-in-law, Constance Rivera, and explained that Samantha needed to stay with her for a few days due to a security concern at work. Constance, who'd never liked him but adored her granddaughter, agreed immediately. As they drove to Constance's house, Samantha chattered about spending time with Grandma, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Hugo's hands gripped the steering wheel as he mentally cataloged his resources. He had security cameras, financial records, phone tracking, and now this mysterious note. Someone thought they could manipulate him through his child, but they'd miscalculated badly. After settling Samantha with her grandmother, Hugo drove back through the night, his mind crystal clear. By the time he reached his empty house, he'd already formulated the beginning of a plan that would destroy everyone who'd betrayed him. In his study, he pulled up the security footage from the park near Samantha's school. It took him 40 minutes to find the right timestamp, a figure in a baseball cap approaching his daughter on the playground. The man kept his face hidden from the cameras, but his build was familiar. Hugo enhanced the image, focusing on the man's hands, his posture, the expensive watch on his wrist. Drew Munoz. The bastard had used his daughter to deliver a threat. Hugo's phone rang. Marissa calling from work. Hey, where's Samantha? The house is dark. She's safe, Hugo replied, his voice giving nothing away. I had some business to take care of. What kind of business? Hugo, you're scaring me. You should be scared. The line went quiet for a long moment. I'll be home in an hour. We need to talk. Yes, Hugo agreed, pouring himself a whiskey as he stared at Drew Munoz's frozen image on his screen. We do. As he waited for his wife to come home and lie to his face, Hugo opened his laptop and began typing. The game had escalated beyond a simple affair. They'd threatened his child, used her innocence as a weapon. That was a mistake that would cost them everything. By dawn, Hugo Duke would begin implementing a plan that would systematically destroy everyone who'd betrayed him. And unlike his enemies, he never bluffed. Chapter 4. The Web Begins. Hugo was pouring his second whiskey when Marissa's key turned in the lock. He remained in his study, letting her call his name as she searched the empty house. When she finally found him, she looked disheveled, her carefully styled hair mussed and her lipstick gone. Where's Samantha? She demanded, though her voice carried an undertone of guilt. Somewhere safe, Hugo replied without looking up from his computer screen. Tell me about Drew Munoz. The color drained from Marissa's face. She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it, recognizing the futility. Hugo had always been able to read her like an open book. It's not what you think, she began, the classic opening of every cheating spouse. It's exactly what I think. Hugo finally turned to face her, his gray eyes like chips of Arctic ice. The question is how long it's been going on and how far you're willing to let it go. Marissa sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her composure cracking. 6 weeks. It started innocent, just talking while Samantha had her lessons. He was going through his divorce, and I was feeling. She trailed off, unable to finish. Feeling what? Neglected? Unappreciated. Hugo's voice carried no emotion, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Was it worth it, Marissa? Was 6 weeks of fucking a stable hand worth 20 years of marriage? She flinched at his crude language. Hugo never swore, never lost control. I want to fix this. I'll end it tomorrow. You can't fix betrayal, Hugo said quietly. You can only pay for it. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photographs. Marissa's car at a motel outside town, time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when she'd claimed to be at a PDA meeting. Another showed her and Drew kissing in the stable office, taken with a telephoto lens through the window. How long have you been watching me? She whispered. Long enough. Hugo finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate precision. But surveillance isn't why I'm angry, Marissa. This is. He showed her the crumpled note Samantha had brought home. As Marissa read it, her hands began to shake. He said he would handle it, she said, her voice barely audible. He said he'd find a way to make you understand. By threatening our daughter? Hugo's mask of control finally slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. By using an 8-year-old child to deliver intimidation? He didn't mean it that way. Drew's not. Drew's not what? A predator who involves children in adult problems? A coward who hides behind a little girl instead of facing me directly? Hugo stood, his presence filling the room. You brought this man into our lives, Marissa. Into our daughter's life. You gave him access to the one person I'd burn the world to protect. Marissa was crying now, makeup streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sorry doesn't fix this. Hugo moved to the window, staring out at the grounds he'd spent years making perfect for his family. You and your boyfriend made a critical error. You involved Samantha. What are you going to do? Hugo's reflection in the window showed a man who'd inherited his father's capacity for ruthless calculation. I'm going to teach you both what happens when someone threatens a duke. He turned back to his wife, noting how she shrank from his gaze. You have one job now, Marissa. You're going to continue this affair exactly as you have been. Same schedule, same patterns. And you're going to help me destroy him. I won't. You will. Hugo's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Drew learns exactly what kind of woman abandons her husband for a stable hand. I'll ruin him professionally, financially, and personally. And then I'll take Samantha and you'll never see either of us again." Marissa stared at him in horror. This wasn't the man she'd married, the controlled businessman who solved problems with negotiations and contracts. This was someone darker, more primal, the man who'd built an empire from nothing and eliminated anyone who stood in his way. "You can't take her from me. Watch me." Hugo returned to his desk, effectively dismissing her. "Your boyfriend wants to meet me tomorrow night. You're going to make sure he's there." As Marissa stumbled toward the door, Hugo called after her. "And Marissa? If you warn him, if you try to run, if you do anything except exactly what I tell you, I'll make what I do to Drew look like mercy compared to what happens to you." After she left, Hugo sat alone in his study, staring at the family portrait on his desk. 20 years of marriage, 8 years of fatherhood, all of it tainted by betrayal. But Hugo Duke had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Raleigh? It's Hugo. I need a favor." Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. The next evening, Hugo drove to Riverside Park alone, arriving 30 minutes early to survey the terrain. Old habits from his father's dangerous business dealings had taught him to always control the environment. He parked where his headlights would illuminate the meeting spot, while keeping himself in shadow. At exactly midnight, Drew Munoz emerged from the tree line, moving with the arrogant swagger of a man who thought he held all the cards. Hugo remained in his car, letting Drew wait in the pool of light, studying his enemy. Drew was younger than expected, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that attracted bored housewives. But Hugo noticed the nervous energy, the way Drew's eyes darted around the park, the slight tremor in his hands. This wasn't a man accustomed to real danger. Finally, Hugo stepped out of his Mercedes, his footsteps echoing across the empty park. Drew's posture straightened as he approached, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "You must be the husband," Drew said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Marissa's told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has." Hugo stopped just outside arm's reach, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Though I doubt she mentioned that I don't negotiate with men who threaten children." Drew's bravado faltered slightly. "I never threatened your kid. I just thought you deserved to know the truth about your wife." "The truth?" Hugo's laugh was devoid of humor. "The truth is that you're a twice-divorced predator who seduces married women for sport. The truth is that you're so deep in debt that you saw my wife as a meal ticket. The truth is that you're too much of a coward to face me directly, so you used an 8-year-old girl to deliver your message." "You don't know anything about me," Drew snarled, his mask slipping. "I know everything about you." Hugo pulled out his phone and scrolled through Catalina's detailed report. Drew Ezra Munoz, born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, son of Frank and Rebecca Munoz, owners of Munoz Feed and Supply. 2 failed marriages, both ending due to your infidelity. Current debt load of $127,000, mostly gambling losses from illegal poker games in Kansas City. Drew's face had gone pale. "How did you?" "I know about the insurance fraud from 2019. The workers' comp claim you filed after staging an accident at your family's warehouse. I know about the burglary charges that were dropped when your father paid restitution." Hugo's voice remained conversational, but his eyes were predatory. "I also know about the DUI you covered up in Austin, and the assault charge in Denver that went away when you paid the victim to stay quiet. What do you want?" Drew's voice was barely a whisper now. "I want you to understand the game you're playing." Hugo stepped closer, close enough that Drew could see the cold calculation in his gray eyes. "You thought you were dealing with some corporate drone who'd roll over when you threatened his family. But I'm not that man. Marissa said you were just a security consultant. Marissa doesn't know what I really do." Hugo's smile was arctic. "She thinks I run background checks and install alarm systems. She doesn't know about the contract negotiations I conduct for Fortune 500 companies when their executives are kidnapped overseas. She doesn't know about the industrial espionage cases I solve when corporations need problems to disappear quietly." Drew tried to back away, but Hugo's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "She certainly doesn't know about the men who've tried to threaten me before," Hugo continued softly. "Or what happened to them. You're bluffing." Hugo released Drew's wrist and pulled out his phone again, showing him a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to show a man lying motionless beside a car in what looked like a parking garage. "Marcus Webb. He tried to blackmail one of my clients in 2018. The police ruled it a heart attack brought on by stress. Hugo swiped to the next image. Thomas Keller. He thought he could muscle his way into one of my contracts. Boating accident in international waters. Very tragic. You're insane, Drew breathed. I'm thorough. Hugo pocketed his phone. Here's what's going to happen, Drew. You're going to continue your affair with my wife, exactly as you have been. You're going to follow a script I provide. And at the end, when I've gotten everything I need, you're going to disappear from our lives forever. And if I refuse? Hugo's smile widened, and for the first time, Drew saw the man who'd built an empire from nothing and eliminated anyone who stood in his way. Then tomorrow morning, the Kansas City police will receive an anonymous tip about a major gambling operation. They'll find your prints all over the evidence I plant. Your parole officer will be very interested to learn about your recent activities. Hugo began counting on his fingers. The IRS will audit your taxes going back 7 years. Your ex-wives will receive detailed information about assets you hid during your divorces. And your parents will learn exactly what kind of man their son really is. Drew's knees buckled slightly. You can't. That's just the legal problems, Hugo continued pleasantly. The illegal ones would be much more creative. Did you know that horse tranquilizer, when injected properly, can cause paralysis that mimics a stroke? Very difficult to detect, and the victim remains conscious throughout. The color had completely drained from Drew's face. What do you want me to do? Hugo handed him a sealed envelope. Follow these instructions exactly. Deviation will result in consequences you can't imagine. As Drew fumbled with the envelope, Hugo turned and walked back toward his car. Oh, and Drew, if you ever approach my daughter again, they'll never find enough of you to bury. Driving home, Hugo felt the first stirrings of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place exactly as he'd planned. Marissa and Drew thought they were playing games with a cuckolded husband, but they were actually walking into a trap designed by a man who'd spent his life studying human weakness. By the time he was finished with them, they'd beg for the mercy he'd never give. Chapter 6. The Trap Titans. Over the next 2 weeks, Hugo orchestrated his wife's affair with the precision of a military campaign. The instructions he'd given Drew were simple but comprehensive. Specific times and locations for their meetings, conversations to have with Marissa, even the gifts to buy her. Every move was calculated to build evidence while isolating them from potential allies. Hugo watched it all unfold from his network of surveillance cameras and listening devices. He'd had Raleigh Simmons, his former military contact turned private contractor, install additional equipment in places Drew and Marissa thought were safe. The motel room they frequented, Drew's apartment, even the stable office where they'd first kissed. What neither of them realized was that Hugo wasn't just gathering evidence of adultery. He was engineering their complete destruction, piece by carefully planned piece. On Thursday evening, Hugo sat in his study reviewing the day's intelligence when Catalina knocked on his door. She entered carrying a thick folder and a tablet displaying financial records. The Munoz family businesses are more interesting than they appear, she reported, settling into the chair across from his desk. Frank Munoz built his feed store empire using leveraged buyouts of smaller competitors, but he's been struggling with debt service since 2020. They're currently 3 months behind on their primary business loan. How much do they owe? $2.3 million to First National Bank. The loan officer is Benjamin Powers. He's been extending payment deadlines, but the bank's board is pressuring him to call it in. Hugo made a note on his legal pad. Benjamin Powers had been a client 5 years ago when his daughter was kidnapped in Mexico. Hugo had negotiated her release and eliminated the kidnappers quietly. Powers owed him a favor that had never been collected. What about Drew's gambling debts? More complex than I initially thought. He owes money to 3 separate operations in Kansas City, but the largest creditor is Waylon Johnston. He runs high-stakes poker games for wealthy clients. Johnston's been patient because Drew's father has been making payments. But recently Frank Munoz stopped covering his son's losses. Why? Catalina smiled grimly. Because someone's been anonymously informing Frank about his son's activities. Amazing how a concerned citizen can send detailed gambling records to a father trying to preserve his family's reputation. Hugo nodded approvingly. He'd started that particular fire 2 weeks ago, knowing it would pressure Drew exactly as intended. What's Johnston's timeline? Drew has until the end of the month to pay $84,000 or face consequences. Johnston's not known for his patience once deadlines pass. Perfect. Hugo turned to his computer and began typing. I want you to purchase Frank Munoz's business loan from First National. Use one of our shell companies. Make it look like a routine debt acquisition. The whole $2.3 million? Whatever it takes. And arrange a meeting with Johnston for next week. I think we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding Drew's debt. As Catalina left to execute his instructions, Hugo's phone buzzed with a text from Marissa. Running late again. Emergency board meeting for the children's writing program. Hugo checked his surveillance feeds and found Marissa in room 247 of the Riverside Inn, where she was definitely not discussing children's writing programs. Drew was there too, following Hugo's script perfectly by presenting her with the expensive bracelet Hugo had instructed him to buy, using a credit card that would create a convenient paper trail. The irony wasn't lost on Hugo that he was funding his wife's adultery while simultaneously documenting it for her destruction. His phone rang. Constance Rivera checking on Samantha, who'd been staying with her grandmother for 2 weeks now. Hugo had explained it as a security precaution related to a case, and Constance had accepted it without question, grateful for the extended time with her granddaughter. She's asking when she can come home, Constance said. I told her daddy's busy with work, but she misses you both. Soon, Hugo promised, his voice softening at the mention of his daughter. Is she happy there? Oh yes, we're having wonderful adventures. Today we went to the butterfly garden, and tomorrow we're planning to bake cookies for her school fundraiser. Constance paused. Hugo, is everything all right? You sound different. Everything's fine. I'm just tired. Well, don't work too hard. Samantha needs her father, and Marissa needs her husband. After ending the call, Hugo stared at the family portrait on his desk. Samantha needed her father, yes. But Marissa had forfeited her right to a husband the moment she chose betrayal over loyalty. His computer chimed with an incoming message from Raleigh Simmons. Package delivered. Both targets are now under full surveillance. Additional assets are in position per your request. Hugo opened the encrypted attachment and studied the personnel files Raleigh had provided. 6 men, all former military, all with specialized skills in surveillance and intimidation. They would remain invisible until Hugo needed them, but their presence would ensure that neither Marissa nor Drew could escape the net that was closing around them. The next phase would begin soon. Hugo had spent weeks gathering intelligence and positioning his pieces. Now it was time to start applying pressure, to force his enemies into the mistakes that would give him everything he needed to destroy them completely. He poured himself a whiskey and raised the glass toward the family portrait, offering a mock toast. To betrayal, he said quietly, and the price it demands. Chapter 7. The Pressure Cooker. Monday morning brought the first domino falling exactly as Hugo had engineered. Frank Munoz received a certified letter informing him that his family's business loan had been acquired by Meridian Holdings, LLC, one of Hugo's shell companies. The new payment terms were harsh. Full payment within 60 days or immediate foreclosure proceedings would begin. Hugo watched Frank's panicked phone calls through the surveillance network he'd established around the Munoz family business. By noon, Frank was demanding answers from his son about the gambling debts that had apparently triggered this financial catastrophe. The confrontation between father and son was brutal and public, occurring in the feed store's main office while customers and employees watched through the glass walls. Frank's face was purple with rage as he waved financial statements showing Drew's debts, while Drew stood frozen, realizing that someone had systematically exposed every secret he'd tried to hide. From his downtown office, Hugo observed it all with the satisfaction of a chess master watching his opponent's king fall into check. But this was only the beginning. That afternoon, Drew's phone rang while he was giving a writing lesson. The caller was Waylon Johnston, the Kansas City gambling boss, with news that Drew's debt had been sold to new management. The new owners wanted a meeting that evening to discuss repayment terms. What Drew didn't know was that Hugo had purchased his gambling debt for pennies on the dollar, using Johnston as a front to maintain the illusion of independence. The meeting location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town, had been carefully chosen for its isolation and the psychological impact it would have on a man already terrified of violence. Hugo arrived at the warehouse first, accompanied by Raleigh Simmons and 2 other men whose military bearing was unmistakable even in civilian clothes. They positioned themselves strategically around the cavernous space, creating an atmosphere of controlled menace. When Drew's trembling hands pushed open the warehouse door, he found Hugo sitting calmly at a folding table, a briefcase open before him containing stacks of documentation. "Sit down, Drew," Hugo said pleasantly, as if they were discussing the weather. "We have business to conclude." Drew's eyes darted around the warehouse, taking in the shadowy figures positioned at the exits. "You bought my debt, among other things." Hugo gestured to the chair across from him. "Your family's business loan, your outstanding credit card balances, even the lien on your truck. I now own every aspect of your financial existence. What do you want?" Hugo opened a manila folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed Drew and Marissa in compromising positions, time-stamped and dated with clinical precision. But these weren't the blurry surveillance shots Drew might have expected. They were professionally composed, clearly showing both participants' faces. "I want you to understand the scope of your situation," Hugo said. "These photographs will be delivered to your parents, your ex-wives, your employer, and every member of the country club where you thought you were building a respectable reputation." Drew's hands shook as he looked at the images. "Marissa will be destroyed too. Marissa is my concern, not yours." Hugo closed the folder with deliberate care. "Your concern is choosing between two equally unpleasant options." He opened his briefcase and withdrew 2 documents. "Option 1. You signed this confession detailing your affair with my wife, your gambling addiction, and your threats against my daughter. The confession will be notarized and filed with my attorney. In exchange, I'll forgive your debts and give you 48 hours to leave town permanently." And option 2. Hugo's smile was predatory. "Option 2 is that I ruin you slowly, piece by piece, until you beg me for the mercy you'll never receive. Your family loses their business. Your gambling associates receive detailed information about your cooperation with law enforcement, information that will make you a marked man in Kansas City. And the photographs of you and my wife become public in the most humiliating way possible." Drew stared at the documents, his face ashen. "This is extortion. This is justice." Hugo's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You threatened my daughter, Drew. You used her innocence as a weapon against me. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? She wasn't supposed to be involved. I just wanted you to know about Marissa. But you did involve her." Hugo stood slowly, his presence filling the warehouse. "And that was the mistake that sealed your fate." Raleigh stepped forward, placing a pen on the table with careful precision. "Your signature, Mr. Munoz, or we proceed to less pleasant negotiations." Drew's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. The confession was detailed, legally binding, and utterly damning. It would give Hugo everything he needed to destroy Marissa in divorce court while ensuring Drew's permanent exile from their lives. "What about Marissa?" Drew asked as he signed his name. "What happens to her?" Hugo's laugh was devoid of warmth. "Marissa's punishment will be far more creative than anything I could do to you. She betrayed 20 years of marriage and endangered our daughter's innocence. Her suffering will be proportionate." As Drew stumbled toward the warehouse exit, Hugo called after him. 48 hours, Drew. If you're still in my city after that, they'll never find the body." Alone in the warehouse with his men, Hugo felt the cold satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Drew was neutralized, documented, and removed from the equation. Now he could focus his full attention on the woman who'd shared his bed for 20 years while planning his betrayal. Marissa's reckoning would begin tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Marissa knew something was wrong the moment she arrived at the stable and found Drew's office empty, his personal belongings gone. The riding instructor who'd replaced him for the day could only say that Drew had called in sick, then stopped answering his phone entirely. By evening, her texts to Drew had gone unanswered, and a cold dread was settling in her stomach when she arrived home to find Hugo waiting in the living room, still dressed in his business suit, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in his hand. "Where's Drew?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Gone," Hugo replied simply. "Permanently." Marissa sank into the armchair across from him, her face pale. "What did you do?" "I solved a problem." Hugo set down his drink and opened a manila folder on the coffee table between them. "Your boyfriend signed a very detailed confession before he left town. Would you like to read it?" With trembling hands, Marissa took the document and scanned Drew's handwritten admission of their affair, his financial troubles, and his use of Samantha to threaten Hugo. The confession was witnessed and notarized, legally binding and utterly damning. He wouldn't have signed this willingly, she whispered. No, he wouldn't have. Hugo's voice was conversational, but his gray eyes were arctic. Just like you wouldn't have willingly destroyed our marriage if you'd understood the consequences. I want to see Samantha. Samantha is safe with her grandmother, where she'll remain until I decide otherwise. Hugo leaned forward, his presence suddenly dominating the room. You seem to be confused about your position here, Marissa. You're not making demands anymore. You're not the injured party. You're the defendant awaiting sentencing. I have rights. You have exactly the rights I choose to give you. Hugo's interruption was sharp as a blade. And right now, those rights are extremely limited. He opened his laptop and turned it toward her, revealing a video feed from the Riverside Inn. On screen, Marissa watched herself entering room 247 with Drew, timestamped just 3 days ago. I have 6 weeks of surveillance footage, Hugo said casually. Hotel rooms, his apartment, your car, even that romantic dinner you thought was so private at Romano's downtown. Every kiss, every lie, every moment of betrayal, all documented in high definition. Marissa's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the scope of her husband's surveillance operation. How long have you known? Long enough to plan your destruction with the same care you put into planning your affair. Hugo closed the laptop with deliberate precision. The question now is whether you're going to cooperate with your punishment or force me to make it worse. What do you want from me? Hugo stood and walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the evening sky. I want you to understand what you've cost yourself. 20 years of marriage to a man who would have given you everything. A daughter who worshipped you. A life of comfort and security that you threw away for 6 weeks with a stable hand. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Hugo's voice cut through her protest like ice. Every text message, every lie, every moment you chose him over your family, those were choices. And choices have consequences. He returned to his chair and opened another folder, this one containing legal documents. You're going to sign divorce papers that give me full custody of Samantha, our house, and the majority of our assets. In exchange, I'll provide you with a modest settlement and allow you to maintain some contact with our daughter, supervised contact, of course. I won't sign anything until I talk to a lawyer. Hugo's laugh was genuinely amused. By all means, call a lawyer. Explain to them how you conducted a 6-week affair while your husband documented every moment. Show them Drew's confession detailing how you endangered your daughter by involving her in your deception. Ask them what a judge will think when they see the evidence I've compiled. Marissa stared at the divorce papers, realizing that Hugo had anticipated every possible response, blocked every avenue of escape. You planned this whole thing. I planned for every contingency, Hugo corrected. I knew that if you were capable of betraying our marriage, you'd eventually make mistakes I could exploit. I simply positioned myself to take advantage of those mistakes when they occurred. And if I refused to sign? Hugo's smile was predatory. Then tomorrow morning, copies of Drew's confession and selected surveillance footage will be delivered to your employer, your friends, your family, and everyone in Samantha's school district. You'll be unemployable, socially ostracized, and publicly humiliated. More importantly, any custody battle will become a foregone conclusion. You bastard. Perhaps. Hugo poured himself another whiskey, completely unmoved by her hatred. But I'm a bastard who's protected his daughter and eliminated the threats to his family. Can you say the same? Marissa picked up the pen with shaking hands, scanning the divorce settlement that would leave her with barely enough to survive, while Hugo retained everything that mattered. But as humiliating as the terms were, she recognized the truth in his threat. Fighting would only make her punishment worse. What happens after I sign? You have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live, Hugo said as she began signing the documents. You'll be allowed supervised visits with Samantha once a month, pending your behavior and my discretion. You'll receive a modest monthly payment that will continue as long as you remain silent about the details of our divorce. And if I break the silence agreement? Hugo's gray eyes met hers with the cold intensity of a predator studying prey. Then you'll discover that Drew's disappearance was the merciful option. As Marissa signed away 20 years of marriage, Hugo felt the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Justice, he reflected, wasn't always served by courts and lawyers. Sometimes it required a more personal approach. The game was almost over, with only one piece left to move into position. Chapter 9. The Duke's Victory. 3 months later, Hugo stood in his daughter's new bedroom in their new house across town. A sprawling estate with state-of-the-art security and enough distance from their old life to ensure a fresh start. Samantha was arranging her stuffed animals on the window seat, chattering excitedly about her new school and the friends she'd made. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming to visit again?" she asked, holding up her favorite teddy bear for his inspection. "Next weekend," Hugo replied, straightening the bear's tiny jacket. "Remember, she's been traveling for work, so she's very busy." It was a kind lie. The truth, that Marissa had violated the terms of their agreement by contacting a journalist about Hugo's business practices and was now serving a 6-month sentence for violating the non-disclosure agreement she'd signed, would only hurt his daughter. Samantha would learn the reality when she was old enough to understand the adult concepts of betrayal and consequences. The custody arrangement had worked exactly as Hugo intended. Marissa's monthly visits were supervised, brief, and carefully controlled. She tried to fight the divorce settlement through legal channels, but Drew's confession and Hugo's surveillance evidence had made resistance futile. Her lawyer had advised her to accept Hugo's terms rather than face complete ruin in court. "Will Mommy live with us again someday?" Samantha asked, her dark eyes, so much like his own, filled with innocent hope. "No, Princess," Hugo said gently. "Mommy made some choices that mean she can't live with us anymore. But that doesn't change how much we both love you." Samantha nodded with the resilience of childhood, already adapting to their new reality. She'd thrived in her new environment, excelling in school and making friends without the stress of her parents' deteriorating marriage hanging over her daily life. Hugo's phone buzzed with a text from Catalina. "Final report on DM complete. Recommend closing the file." Drew Munoz had lasted exactly 18 months in exile before his gambling addiction and financial desperation led him to attempt blackmail one final time. He'd contacted Hugo 6 weeks ago, demanding money in exchange for his silence about Hugo's methods of resolving their conflict. It had been Drew's final mistake. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental overdose, a not uncommon fate for a man with known addiction problems and mounting debt. The Kansas City police had closed the case after a perfunctory investigation, noting Drew's history of self-destructive behavior and the lack of evidence suggesting foul play. Hugo felt no satisfaction in Drew's death, only the cold completion of a necessary task. Some threats required permanent solutions, and Drew had proven incapable of learning from mercy. "Daddy, are you sad about something?" Samantha's voice brought him back to the present. "No, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about how proud I am of how brave you've been during all these changes." "I'm not brave," Samantha protested. "I was scared when that man gave me the note at the park." Hugo knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. You brought me that note because you knew it was important, even though it frightened you. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. Will bad men try to hurt us again?" "No one will ever hurt you while I'm here," Hugo promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "Daddy's job is to protect you, and I'm very good at my job." Samantha smiled and hugged her teddy bear. "I know. You're the best daddy in the whole world." That evening, after tucking Samantha into bed with her favorite story, Hugo retreated to his new study. The room was similar to his old one, but larger, with better sight lines and more sophisticated security measures. The family portrait from his old desk now sat in a place of honor, though he'd carefully removed Marissa from the frame, leaving only himself and Samantha smiling at the camera. He poured himself a whiskey and opened his laptop to review Catalina's final report on the Drew Munoz matter. Every loose end had been tied off, every potential complication resolved. The file would be archived and forgotten, just another problem solved with typical Duke efficiency. His phone rang, Raleigh Simmons calling with an update on a new contract. "Hugo, I've got a situation developing in Seattle. Corporate executive's daughter was kidnapped, and the locals are out of their depth. Client specifically requested our services based on your reputation. What's the timeline? They need you there tomorrow. It's the kind of work that made your reputation. High stakes, complex variables, and a family that needs someone who gets results no matter what it takes." Hugo considered the offer while studying Samantha's school photo on his desk. His daughter was settled, safe, and thriving. The immediate threats to his family had been eliminated. Perhaps it was time to return to the work that had built his empire, the dangerous cases that required someone willing to operate outside normal boundaries. Send me the details, he decided, and prepare the team for extended deployment. What about the home front? Hugo's smile was cold and satisfied. The home front is secure. All threats have been neutralized. After ending the call, Hugo walked through his new house, checking the security systems and ensuring every lock was properly engaged. The property was a fortress, designed to protect the one person in the world who truly mattered to him. In Samantha's room, he watched his daughter sleep peacefully, her teddy bear clutched against her chest. She would grow up strong and protected, never knowing the full extent of what he'd done to keep her safe. She would remember her mother as someone who'd traveled for work and visited occasionally, not as the woman who'd betrayed their family and paid the ultimate price for that betrayal. Some truths were too harsh for children, just as some justice was too final for courts. Hugo Duke had learned long ago that the world was a dangerous place filled with people willing to hurt innocents for their own gain. He'd made himself into something harder and more ruthless than his enemies, ensuring that threats to his family were met with overwhelming and permanent force. As he returned to his study for one final check of the security monitors, Hugo reflected on the events that had brought him to this point. 3 people had betrayed his trust and threatened his daughter's safety. 2 were gone forever, and the 3rd lived under his complete control, serving as a reminder to anyone who might consider similar betrayals in the future. The Duke family name would continue through Samantha, carried forward by a girl who would grow up knowing that her father was someone who protected what mattered most, no matter the cost. In Hugo's world, that was the only victory that truly counted.